Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats.
You know, the current housing crises that we see in our city and other cities not only cause real world problems for people trying to put a roof over their heads, but they strip the culture and the what makes a city interesting away from itself. And, you know, if you're within the sound of my voice, that must mean you're in the seats with once more. As always, my name is Dave Voigt, and I'm the host of this podcast, where we sit down with a wide-ranging variety of entertainment industry professionals, and we pick their brain about current projects, state of the industry, how they got started, and so very much more, in a light and in a conversational fashion. And you know, if you like how we do things around here, I'm going to go out on a limb and assume that you do, because quite frankly, you're listening right now. And if you are, subscribe. Hit that subscribe button. Give us a 5-star rating on your podcast provider of choice. We're available pretty much everywhere. Places like Apple, Amazon, Spotify, Google. And plus, we archive every single one of our episodes over at our In the Seats YouTube channel. So if you can give us a like and subscribe there as well, we'd absolutely appreciate it. Also, don't hesitate to check us out on social media. We're on the Facebook, we're on the Twitter, we're on the Instagram, we're on the Letterboxd, we're on the TikTok, and God knows we're probably on a few other places too. And In the Seats for all sorts of fun updates. But finally, and I do dare say most importantly, please pay us a visit over at In the Seats, intheseats.ca, for all the latest and greatest from the world of film, television, basically the moving image at large. Because guess what? If we love to watch it and write about it and talk about it, we love it when you come by and read about it and listen about it. So do us that kindness and pay us a visit. On this episode, we got another good documentary. It is available now on demand on tvo.org. Yet another one squeezed out by our fantastic system here in Canada. And it is from a fantastic documentarian, if I do say so myself, Mr. Jamie Kastner. We have talked to him before about his various other films, like There Are No Fakes, Secret Disco Revolution, and so on, and Skyjacker's Tale, and so on and so forth. This one is called Charlotte's Castle, and it's a story of just the skyrocketing rates of housing and how much things cost, and how crazy it's getting, and how one person who lived there, the subject of the film, Charlotte Mickey, who does happen to be an industry sales agent for film, got her her co-residents up together to fight and turn into activists, to make sure that the apartment building they live in, Spadina Gardens, which was built in 1904, is preserved and maintained, and the character is not stripped away from it, but also that these people can stay in their homes, which at the end of the day is really such an important thing. But like I said, I got to talk with the always enjoyable Jamie Kastner about the film and just so on and very much more, man. Jamie is a good listen, and this is a good film. So like I said, if you are in Canada, go to tvo.org, check it out. It is called Charlotte's Castle. Watch it anytime you like, but also first, check out our talk with Jamie, because between you and me, it's a darn good one. No, I mean, just to kick this off officially, I mean, just thank you so much for the time today. I mean, congrats on the movie, man. It's another great one.
Oh, thanks very much, Dave. Thank you.
Now, I mean, I guess my first question is because, walk me through the origin of not just finding the building and wanting to tell this story, but I mean, even using Charlotte as your linchpin. I mean, I suspect I already know the story because I even knew who Charlotte's name was just as I was sort of seeing it. I know this person. But walk me through the origin of I guess starting down this road.
Well, I mean, yes, Charlotte is a something of a legend in the art film world, and our paths had crossed before, certainly. So I actually came to it through a fairly random sequence of events. I came to this story. I, was a renter for many years, and now I own a property infinitely more modest and ugly than the one Charlotte lives in, but which nevertheless, a couple of years ago, it's in the East End and was up for heritage designation.
Yeah.
And frankly, I couldn't really understand why, given that it's just an ugly little building. But but it got me interested in the process of heritage designation, and I discovered at the same time that my place was up for designation, so was a much more grand, interesting sounding building called Spadina Gardens at Spadina, just north of Bloor, which, as I kind of poked around and dug into it more, discovered that it's actually this kind of emblem of all sorts of things in Toronto cultural history. Aside from being a remarkable building, architecturally, it's the oldest rental building in the city, and it has always attracted a unique kind of a creative, spirited, at least, tenant. And the longest standing whom at this point turns out to be, the legendary art film distributor, Charlotte Mickey.
Now, I mean, something I think I really appreciated about this is that, like you just alluded to a little bit, you allowed us to understand sort of how these buildings can have personality based on their tenants and the people who've lived there and the communities and all that sort of thing, but also still sort of maintaining the realities of Reno-viction and what's going on in the city and in so many other cities, not only just with heritage buildings, but I mean, with so many other kind of buildings. And I mean, it can be kind of a scary road to go down. Was there a point during production where you knew you had to tell both stories? Because I mean, I could have imagined you've done sort of a full film just about the history of the building and the people who live there.
Well, absolutely. There were many stories in this one, and it was challenging to figure out, as it always is to some degree, but to figure out what to focus on and how to weave the material together into a semi-cohesive, hopefully, film. And there is always an improvisational nature to this kind of documentary making, and you're drawn in by the characters, by the building. And indeed, as you said, you could have just focused on that. I mean, initially I was interested in the heritage process, then I became fascinated by this building. And then once I learned more about what the tenants had gone through, I realized that it was emblematic, it was representative of a part of the housing crisis that is going on in this city. And yet, my company has actually been involved in producing, we have co-produced another film on the housing crisis a couple of years ago, a film called Push, which was directed by a Swedish filmmaker. But that took a kind of helicopter view of the global housing crisis and the situation in a bunch of different cities across the world. And so I was obviously not looking to repeat that, but sort of inevitably telling the story of the oldest rental building in the city right now. It turns out they're under siege. It turns out the building just sold. It turns out that there is almost a kind of activist motivation behind, to some degree, behind the push for heritage status. So all of that, struck me as rich story material.
No, for sure. And I mean, I'm glad you brought up Push as well, because obviously that's also really an excellent film. But I remember watching that movie and being, quite frankly, terrified. This film actually gave me a little bit of hope and a little bit of sort of joy to the process, because, I mean, at least in understanding not just the heritage process, but just sort of the ability for the tenants to push back. And I mean, I'm kind of curious, as you sort of initially pitch people, like, were people hesitant? Because I mean, again, with the whole Reno-viction story and everything that's happened, there, like, pushback happens between tenants and landlords, and I can imagine it wasn't necessarily an easy sell for you to get people on camera to talk about this.
Absolutely not. It was definitely challenging to get people to talk on camera about what was going on. And and understandably, because they're putting their necks on the line, and they are kind of at the mercy of a landlord who is at that point largely unknown to them. And so there was a lot of trepidation. I would say on both sides. I approach these things journalistically,
Of
and
course, yeah.
I in that I always feel it's stronger in these types of stories to get both sides speaking. And I'm not an activist myself, and I want there are many. This isn't a cut and dry story, and there are different shades to it. I
Of
think
course, yeah.
there are different parts of the everybody is kind of funny at one point or another. As I always somehow find a place for humor in my work, no matter how grave the subject. And I kind of like embracing all of those facets of a story and of the people in it. But yes, people were reluctant to talk. It was a sort of long conversation with the landlord as well. They didn't respond to my initial requests, to talk about the heritage stuff in general terms, but warmed up once the focus was going to be on their building. And that was actually, for the most part, quite a congenial relationship, and resulted in them saying what they said on camera.
Exactly. Now, I mean, I've got to ask because it feels almost ironic that someone who's spent such a iconic career behind the scenes in the movie industry to ultimately end up being the star, quote unquote, of your film. Like, was there a moment when you knew that, okay, you're like, damn, Charlotte, you've got to be the focus of this film because you're just so damn good in front of the camera?
Well, it was I have crossed paths with once I realized that Charlotte lived in this building I was intrigued by. I mean, I did think, oh, great. Charlotte is famously a character in the business. And though I don't think she doesn't particularly seek self-promotion, although other journalists have noticed it, fashion journalists and other people over the years, she is so eclectic. She has such eclectic taste, and in everything, that has been noticed. But I don't think she seeks the limelight particularly, and so there was a fair bit of trepidation on her part. I didn't know that the film ultimately is called Charlotte's Castle, and I think she is the head of the Tenants Association. She is kind of the glue and in the community there now, and was the driving force behind the heritage designation and application process. So that's that. But I didn't know at the outset that she would be the star per se. I saw it as more of an ensemble piece and a piece about the building. The building is really arguably the star too.
No, but I mean, I'm glad you brought that up. So the castle came before Charlotte. So it wasn't Charlotte then the castle. It was the castle then Charlotte.
Well, it's sort of chicken and egg. I mean,
Yeah.
it's as you were suggesting earlier. I think that again, not wanting to have just another identical drop in the bucket of the endless and understandably endless discussion about the housing crisis. I thought telling the story of one remarkable building and its remarkable inhabitants was kind of the concept going in, as a way of getting at the culture, the cultural soul of a city, which is a hard thing to pin down and a hard thing to capture in a documentary, I think. But it's a kind of Toronto that I was aware of growing up, a kind of people who were interested in a bunch of things other than making money primarily,
For sure. For
essentially.
sure.
Different creative pursuits, different creative interests, colorful characters. And this was the family and the milieu I was lucky enough to grow up in. And and it's something that you feel. On one hand, I think it is I've observed this now happening in different cities that I like, London and New York, and places I've visited and lived. That this phenomenon of these colorful cultural types makes a neighborhood and ultimately a city hot and attractive, and then property values go up. It's the very thing that drives that prices those very people out of the city that they have helped make interesting. And I think that was part of what I was trying to capture with this, that ironic cycle, which is not necessarily anybody's fault. I guess you could just call it, progress, quote unquote, but it's a real threat. It's a real loss, I think. And
and it's such a complex issue too, because
yeah.
like you don't necessarily want to impede progress or impede technology or growth, but at the same time, these places and this culture and this community does add to the vibrancy of a city, and it's one of those things that it can so easily be stripped away. But at the same time, I'm also glad that while we want to support and preserve that, there was a tenant in this building who was like, yeah, all that stuff's nice, but I don't want to be homeless either.
Yeah. Well, I think that was, again, it wound up being such a rich subject, this building and its current and former inhabitants. There was a natural upstairs, downstairs, literally quality to it. As another one of the former basement tenants put it, we used to live in the joke that we lived in the dungeon below the castle. It's I think that it's important to have all those aspects of the conversation, and this not just be a thing about an aesthetic loss. There is a real housing crisis going on in the city and beyond. And I think that part of focusing on this more, let's say, genteel group of people was a way to tell the story differently. And also, even while some of their concerns, even relative to their own less fortunate basement tenants, some of the upstairs folks' concerns may seem trifling at times. And I don't think I shy away from showing that either. But ultimately, you realize that these people, the crisis is real for them too. Even the better heeled folks in these remarkable 2,800 square foot apartments are, if even they are feeling the pinch in a very serious way, which they are, having decided over a successful lifetime that renting was a viable choice. Then the game of high stakes musical chairs real estate began here and everywhere, but especially in big cities like Toronto. They're kind of screwed at an age when they don't have many options. And if even this class of people are suffering, I guess the part of the implicit message of the film, such as it is imagine what it's like for everybody further down the food chain.
For sure. No, absolutely. No, I mean, this is something I've always appreciated about your films, is because while there's going to be a certain degree of through line in terms of theme and kind of the stuff that you tackle, you're also at the same time like squiggling outside the lines and going from disco to air hijacking to art forgery to this. I'm curious, for you, when you're starting in on something, like, what is it that draws you in as a storyteller? Like, is there one specific thing, or is it just sort of the light bulb going off? This could work. Let me go investigate that further.
Well, thank you. First of all, that's very nice of you to say and to have noted. For better and worse, I am an outside the line squiggler. That's an apt characterization of my lack of genre. No, I take it as a compliment. Thank you. It's a cross section. I guess it's true that over, I've now been doing this for a while. I'm just putting the finishing touches on, I guess, my 10th doc. And what is this, the 8th? This is the 8th. So there's another couple coming down the pipeline. And you realize after you develop a certain craft, is all I'm trying to say. Happily you spend enough time doing something, hopefully you develop a craft. And I guess I started, and it's still occasionally when I can, do a bit of print journalism. I guess it's coming to you develop the skill of identifying ideas. It's hard to kind of analyze after the fact, but what is the cross section of things that it's a cross section of things that sort of I have a a sense that I could sink my teeth into, that are kind of juicy, that are not obvious. And, because I do this for a living, unfortunately, I'm not one of those doc makers from a billionaire family, sadly, or happily. I I have to make a living. And I now work with my wife in the business. So she, which is partially why I think things have gotten so productive lately. I have a brilliant producer in Laura. So but anyway, yeah, it's some cross section of, I think I don't like black and white stories generally. I'm more drawn to anti-heroes, to quirkier things, and things that have some kind of political undercurrent to them, but not necessarily in an obvious way. If I were to try to kind of characterize it or analyze it, I guess that's, I like culture. I was a music critic first. I like music. I like art. I like all this stuff. So and I guess I feel compelled to make films that are entertaining first. I do still feel that is the first responsibility of someone in my position. You've got to make it entertaining.
Well, I mean, that's just it. I mean, you really did start making films when the definition of the documentary kind of changed, because I mean, we could think back 20, 30 years ago, people would think documentary, and for the most part, they would think boring talking heads and facts and facts and facts and facts.
Right.
But there was that shift to make them entertaining and to make them engaging, right? And I mean, the streaming boom obviously helped with that, and just sort of the accessibility of it all. How has the landscape of making documentaries changed from your perspective? Because it definitely feels like, at least from an outsider's view, that the rules that used to be there are kind of getting stripped away.
Well, it's absolutely. There have been seismic shifts in the terrain in the time that I have, the last 2 decades that I have been doing this. And for one thing, yes, as you're kind of suggesting, I think that the type of stuff I was doing was viewed as more of an outlier, of a more oddball stuff compared to the mainstream broadcast material. My very first film, which was also for TVO, called Free Trade is Killing My Mother, which I made with a friend, the late Guy O'Sullivan. And it was a road movie at the Quebec City Summit of the Americas. It was called Free Trade is Killing My Mother. Did I just say that? And it was about us going off to join the revolution in my parents' minivan. And, we were making a road movie, and we forgot to film exteriors of the van. So, we thought, well, shit, we can't, what are we going to do? And I came up with this concept to have a toy van on a map as the thing that you cut to, and just like have a finger pushing this toy van.
I love it.
That was somehow, I'm sorry, I'm going off on a tangent here, but I mean, that was so wacky at the time, like as a kind of solution to that I'm very proud of, and that gave me great creative satisfaction that it worked. And then I expanded a thing called Van World. So we used the van, we ultimately had a thing with the van going into a fence with tear gas, and, it became a whole like sideline for this, TVO documentary. But it was, I mean, people appreciated it. It was commissioned by Rudy Boutignol. I don't think it got into any festivals, but whatever, my career, such as it was, has launched. Anyway, sorry, to answer your question, I think that the needle has moved and stuff has become hipper. I would say that Errol Morris, back then was viewed as an art house kind of icon. Now he's definitely an acknowledged master aesthetic god of documentary, who has defined a whole look and style. I always liked particularly A Thin Blue Line and his, but there was for a long time where recreations were verboten. Now you see a kind of stylish cinematic recreation everywhere. So I think the genre has gotten hipper. I think as there was the sense that it was big business for a while there was these crazy bidding frenzies over these things at Sundance and places like that. I sense that that's died down now. it also has brought a lot more Americans, many of whom perhaps of necessity are trust fund kids, because there's no decent funding system in the States like there is in Canada.
Yeah.
And so I feel like there's this kind of lottery, this American lottery of documentary out there, where you read about, the big sales at the big festivals and the Oscars, and, like the Academy has moved in a big way in certain festivals that used to just be remote doc things like Amsterdam.
Right.
But I don't think that, I am fortunate to have been established basically with the Canadian public funding system and public television at the base of what I do. I think that, to my mind, still gives the greatest creative freedom in my experience, and long may it prosper. It's on. I've had films on Netflix. Fakes is on Amazon. I mean, I think it's great that there are these other outlets there, but I don't think that I don't think anybody could argue that the streamers have sort of stepped in to fill the gap or fill the role that in this country anyway is the seedbed of like our funding and broadcast model for creative work. So
for sure,
they have their own restrictions, their own conventions, and Netflix, now you're in the big high stakes film business where it's full of whims. It's full of, everybody trying to read the market and decide what's hot, what's not this week. Now, crime, but not too crime, but is it too much violent crime, or is it not violent enough? Can you make, these things are, I gather, fed out from these services to agents regularly saying, this is what we're looking for. So I think there are pros and cons to this brave new world.
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, especially when it comes to true crime, it almost has its own sort of sub farming out market in and of itself to really output so many of those. Like the rate that they're getting output at is kind of frightening.
It's wild. I mean, when I did Skyjacker's Tale in 2016, there was not. I remember the American distributor, asking me if should we put a true crime documentary on the poster? Like, this was not a phrase at the time, or was just starting to be a phrase. It's hard to imagine such a time now.
Right. Yeah.
So inundated with it. And I just came across that story, as you may recall, through my car mechanic. But, and I thought, this is a hell of a story. But yes, it's become such a machine now. It's wild.
Just as a side note, did you get to see the Errol Morris at TIFF?
I did.
Oh, loved it.
I mean, he is a master. He was in top form. I love John le Carré as well. And so, yeah, no, I mean, and visually, nobody can touch him. I mean, he's built this whole language. Also, I don't know if you were there for the premiere, but at the Q&A, they talk, and the producers, le Carré's sons are the producers, that company, Ink Factory, and they talked about the meeting of the two titans for this interview, and with a crew of 80 people there for the interview. A crew of
I wish I had to go to the P&I for that. Oh no.
No, I shelled out on top of my pass. I just wanted to see the Q&A for that one. But yeah, no, I really like that film. Yeah.
Excellent. Now, I mean, just to put a bow on this, and I mean, I can imagine this is a problem, not just for you, but I mean, documentary filmmakers in general, because while Charlotte's Castle does have a certain degree of resolution to it, you're never going to get the entire resolution. And I mean, and the story is still evolving. How do you, as a filmmaker and a storyteller, go, I've got enough, I've got to walk away now?
Well, I think it is, you're kind of asking yourself these questions, obviously, as you go along. And there's obviously a fair amount of panic throughout the process, where you say many times, not only through production, but through editing, and sometimes, like, this was filmed over a period of a few years, and over COVID and all sorts of challenges. You're asking yourself, do I have a film here? Do I have a film? You're asking the editor, do I have a film here? What are we going to do? How are we going to solve this? Should we make this about many buildings? And that's the beauty of the form. I mean, unlike scripted, I from all I've gathered, not having made one yet, but the part of the, you can go out and move to plan B if plan A isn't working in the edit.
Right.
If you can have the money and if you can raise the money to do it, you can do it, or beg, steal, and borrow or something. But in this case, I thought, I knew there were great characters in a great building, but I knew it needed a story arc, and I guess I decided at a certain point that it would be this process of heritage designation that would be the kind of endpoint. And in truth, this is all happening. It's laid out in a certain way in the film, as a kind of cohesive story, and a chronological story. But, of course, that isn't necessarily the way it happens while you're shooting.
Of
So
course, yeah.
kind of like looking at these things that you've got and kind of going, could it, how could it, what could it, it's like deciding when do you stop shooting, how many tenants it was a challenge to get the tenants to participate, but then how much is enough, how much is too much. You're kind of gauging, you're trying to gauge what'll be interesting, what'll make a good story, do we have a cross section of this kind of thing? You don't want it to be repetitive. You want to show the range, the upstairs, downstairs. You're kind of like putting ideas on a board about these themes, these characters, you're kind of constantly trying to map things out on, whiteboards or cork boards or boards of some kind, or the computer. But I guess somewhere along that line, I had a sense, and as I say, you do it for a while, I guess you get better at guessing correctly what will work and what won't. Sure. And so I just had a sense that this heritage thing would give you an arc of a certain arc. It's not a complete happy ending of, as there isn't in life, this is where we leave off this tale. But you also see the trajectory, if you think about it, much like a drama, of these protagonists going from, a disparate, scared group of people into becoming activists who actually accomplish something fairly significant.
Now, last question. Was Charlotte the sales agent on her own movie?
No. In fact, we have a French company has taken it, a French company called Reservoir Docs.
So fantastic.
Also heartening because it shows that it's not just heartening or disheartening. Heartening for the film, disheartening for the state of the world, because it shows it's not just a Toronto story.
No, but it is a universal story. But it's again, you've made it with seriousness, but also with some light and some heart as well. And Jamie, it's another great piece of work. But honestly, as always, thank you for the time today, brother. Keep up the good work, man. And just again, thanks for the time, man. It's always appreciated when we get to talk.
Well, it's always a pleasure talking to you. You're such an intelligent interviewer. It's a pleasure.
Well, thanks. I do my best, but thanks again, man. Talk to you soon.
Okay, take care.
And don't forget to visit our friends over at Bay Street Video for all your DVD, Blu-ray rental, or purchasing needs this summer, as they are still open for curbside and some mailing delivery as well. Over at 1172 Bay Street, Toronto, Ontario, Canada, you can give them a call at 416-964-9088. That's 416-964-9088. Or send them an email at baystreetvideoto@gmail.com for any of your DVD and Blu-ray needs.